Joining me today is one of my favorites, Tim Shanahan. Hi, Tim. Welcome to the show.
How you doing, Cheryl? Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks for being here. Tim is a distinguished professor emeritus at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where he was founding director of the UIC Center for Literacy. Previously, he was director of reading for the Chicago Public Schools. He has authored more than 200 publications on literacy education, many of which I have read. His research emphasizes the connections between reading and writing, literacy in the disciplines, and improvement of reading and achievement. Today, we will discuss teaching reading with grade level text. So, Tim, let's get to it. Why exactly is it so important for teachers today to teach reading with grade level texts?
Well, there are really several reasons for this. Historically, teachers have been told not to do that, to only do that with kids who are on level. If kids are behind, you're supposed to drop back and teach them with the text at their level. So if you're a fourth grade teacher, you have some child in your class who reads at a second grade level according to the tests, you're supposed to stick that child in a second grade book, which raises the question, of course, is when does that child ever get to read the fourth grade book? When will they learn the fourth grade curriculum? It's something that for some reason people didn't seem to ask very much over all the decades that we've done it this way. So that child gets, let's say the child is hugely successful and learns what he or she is taught that year. By the end of the year, that child should be ready for a third grade book when they go to fifth grade.
Right.
Uh, what happens when they leave high school? We're guaranteeing that that child is going to be at a much lower level than their classmates. And in fact, that is exactly what we see. We see children who are graduating from our high schools who are reading at levels that frankly won't allow them to get into the military, won't allow them to get a paying job that they could actually live on, and doesn't allow them to succeed with the kinds of textbooks that colleges use in their freshman year. So we've got to find ways of accelerating literacy. And when we look, this idea of the reading level is something that for first 50 years of the 20th century, say from about 1910 to about 1950, it seemed like every school district in the country came up with a special plan of how they were going to group kids and test kids and combine kids. And the scheme that ended up being the popular one was you give kids an informal reading inventory, you figure out which level of book the youngster can read comfortably right now, and comfortably in those claims was the kids would read with 95% accuracy, which would mean they wouldn't make more than 5 oral reading mistakes for 100 words that they were reading.
Right.
And they would be able to read that text at, say, about a 75% comprehension level, 75 to 89%, which actually, if you think about it, that's pretty good reading. So essentially, what teachers were being told is you can only teach reading with books the kids can already read.
Right.
But think about that. If you can already read it, why do I need to teach that to you? It seems rude. I often hear that it's described as mansplaining by some of my women colleagues. And so people in the last couple decades actually started doing research on this. And what we've been seeing from the research is if you're teaching kids with grade level text, if you're teaching kids with text that frankly for a lot of our kids is at their frustration level, according to those numbers that they came up with in the 1940s, frankly, kids either learn just as well or they learn better.
Right.
And I honestly think if we taught teachers how to deal with, help kids deal with this more complex text, they'd all do better with it. And there are a few other reasons. Certainly, one of the things that we've known for a very long time is the whole grouping scheme within classrooms, where you have the really good readers and the average readers, and the really low readers. has been terribly discriminatory to that bottom group. We
Yes.
segregate them off. And what the sociological research says there is that it does real harm to those kids, that it gives them kind of a a double penalty. One, they're not getting the opportunity to learn the same things the other kids are,
That's right.
and they're also really being treated badly in some ways that has larger effects, and that especially seems to affect minority kids, for the surprising reason that those are almost always the kids who get stuck in that group.
Yeah.
Um, so we want to avoid that. Another issue that's hot these days is folks are very concerned about the knowledge that boys and girls get. Um,
Mm,
and so the notion of, I'm going to not just keep you in easy reading materials if you're a low reader, but I'm going to also make sure that you're not being exposed to the same content that the other kids are, and certainly not the same depth or level of that content. So there are
yeah.
lots of reasons why we need to be trying to get as many kids taught at grade level as possible. And our excuses in the past that, well, they can't read at that level yet, that's why we teach them. And so
Yeah.
we want to put those kids in grade level text, and we want to teach them at those grade levels, which requires some adjustments to how we do business.
Tim, so yeah, you mentioned an equity issue, a knowledge gap issue. Like there's so many things that really go into making sure that we're teaching grade level text. I wonder though if it's any different when you're working with beginning readers or older readers.
I'm really happy you asked that, because the research that we have on this really goes second grade through 12th grade.
Hmm.
We don't have research on beginning readers with this, and there are some reasons to believe that it might be a bad idea. That beginning readers really do need it to be easy, text to be easy in most terms. The thing that makes beginning reading text hard is the decoding.
Yeah.
The kids have trouble reading the words, and we want them to learn how to decode, how to turn those printed symbols into language, and doing that means the kids have to see some words over and over again. They need to see some spelling patterns over and over again. So you get into
Yeah.
these issues of decodability and repetition. Um, and so we really want to make sure that kids are seeing that kind of repetition and that kind of decodability initially, which means you don't want kids in text where it's hard to figure that aspect of text out. And
Right.
so I think the safest thing to do would be to teach young readers with texts that they're going to find easy, with the exception of the decodability. And that, of course, is what we're teaching them to handle at
Sure.
those levels. In a way, Cheryl, I think what we actually did is we took something that was a really good idea for kids at the very beginning, and we said, why don't we just teach everybody like they're in kindergarten, first grade? Which is a really bad idea. So
Indeed,
I
it
think
is.
the better thing is, let's teach everybody at their level, but there's this exception of the beginners where we want to control that text difficulty. I was a first grade teacher, and I was a first grade teacher at a time when kindergartens didn't teach reading. And so,
Mm.
I was really taking kids from not being able to read to usually around Christmas time or so, they could read.
Yeah.
And, we had 30 some kids in a classroom. It wasn't like, everybody on November 1st could read, and now we just kept going. It would be some kids could read by October 1st, some kids could read by
Yeah.
November 1st. It kind of goes on all year long like that. So the notion of taking some youngster who can't read at all and just throwing them in a text because some of the other kids in the class can read, that makes no sense. Maybe research someday will change my mind on this, but I think please, anyone who's watching this, listening to this, do not put beginners in grade level text just because Tim Shanahan said so. Put them in text that they're going to be able to read reasonably easily and that
True.
will give them a chance to learn those words and that decoding. So
That's awesome. You know, so here's what I have to say. I know teachers now are their ears are perking up, and they want to know, well, what exactly can I do? What do I need to think about when selecting a text and planning an actual reading lesson?
yeah, a lot of teachers think, well, if you do what I'm saying, then you just ignore the distance between the kids and the text, and you can't do that. That's not
Right.
smart.
Right.
And so, I guess the first thing you do is you don't pick the text on the basis of its readability, but you'd like to know its readability.
Yeah.
Uh, I want to know how much help a particular child is going to need to read this text. And so, if I'm a third grade teacher, I'm working with a third grade textbook. I've checked to make sure it really is third grade level. The publisher's given me the information. I'm set with that. But now I've got this youngster who's a year behind.
Right.
I want to know, oh, look, the book is at third grade, he's at second grade. He's going to need more help than his classmate who's reading at a third grade level.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing I want to know. At that point, usually people get right into, oh, what skill do I want to teach?
Mm.
I'm going to go a different way and say, given that this is the text I want to teach, not the skill, the text, I want to go through this text. I want to read this text, and I want to look to see, what do I think is potentially confusing to kids? What might trip them up? What might be difficult for them to understand? It's a whole different mindset. I'm making the text the center of my instruction, not, oh, we're going to teach main idea today, or, oh, I want the kids to learn this list of 6 words. No, I want to know we're going to guide this kid to read this text. What's
Mm.
going to get in the way? And you're not always going to get that right.
Right.
You're not always going to know, but there are a whole bunch of things that can really mess you up. One is depending on the distance between the kid and the text, it might be a decoding issue. You might think some are going to really have trouble reading the words. In other cases, you might go, wow, I know the publisher wants me to teach these 6 words, but I'm looking at page 3 here, and I think the kid isn't going to know this word, and that's going to get in his way.
Mm.
Or, well, I don't know about the words. The words aren't that hard, but this is a very complicated long sentence that I think is going to get in the way.
Mm.
Or it's getting confusing. I can't track who, they keep using he and his and him and them, and I don't know who everybody is. I got to track. Gee, they started out talking about Jimmy, and then they brought in Tyrell, and I'm getting confused. How can I map that through? And
Right.
you go through like that, kind of figuring out, sussing it out, what's going to be the problem. And then next thing is I want to know what you're going to do about that. So what I suggest that people do is a very different kind of questioning routine than you usually come up with. Usually it's, oh, we want an inference question, and we want a question where the youngster can say all these kinds of things. What I want to know is I want to know if you're right. You've predicted that the kids are going to get tripped up by a particular vocabulary word.
Mm.
What aren't they going to understand about the text because of that vocabulary word? Don't go in and ask the kids, did you know this word? Go in and ask them the question that you wanted. What's going to trip them up? Ask a question about that. A
Yeah.
question that will allow you to see, yeah, they didn't get it.
Mm.
Or, gee, they did get it. That's really interesting. Let's talk about that word. And
Yeah.
so what you want your questions to do is to reveal what kids aren't getting, where they're getting tripped up.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want to know. And because I want to know that, what that means is if it turns out I'm right, gee, you couldn't make sense of that part of the text because you didn't know the meaning of that word. The word was reluctant. You didn't know what it meant. That means you didn't know how that child felt. You didn't understand why he was doing what he was doing in the next page, and it messed up your comprehension. So I'm not going to ask about reluctant. I'm going to ask about why he did this particular thing. And the
Right.
youngster said, I don't know, or missed it, didn't get it. That's cool. Let's go back to that sentence now as a group. Let's read it. Let's take a look at, what you didn't understand there, and we'll fix it. and then
Right.
we'll go on from there. And you do that all the way through the text. And sometimes it's those things you predicted, and sometimes other things become apparent to you that they don't understand, and you're just
Right.
going to have to respond to that. You're going to have to adjust. But the point is always, we want the youngster to succeed with the text. They've got to do well with this, but they're going to do well because of my support. They're going to do well because I'm going to make sure wherever they trip, I'm going to get them through that part of it, not just by telling them, but that showing them how to deal with it.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
might show them how to break down a sentence. I might show them how to use context to figure out that word. I
Mm,
might show them, maybe I've decided this text is really too hard. We're going to do some fluency work, and then we're going to come back to reading it for comprehension. I mean, I have a
mm,
lot of tools at my
yeah.
disposal. Um, the old way of thinking of it, we have to avoid all error because we don't have anything to do if the kid gets it wrong. Here I'm saying, man, there are so many things we can do to help, but
Yeah.
we have to know what they're getting wrong. And so that might, there are all kinds of things you might do to manage that kind of a group. But the basic idea is set it up so the text is in the center, set it up so your questions expose what kids aren't understanding. And when they're not understanding something, it doesn't just tell them, take them back to the text and guide them to figure it out, show them how.
Sure. Sure. That data is so incredibly important to gather so that you can make some more important decisions. But when I think about planning a lesson, right? And you and you
Right?
plan it, you have a well-planned lesson that you're facilitating, and then you find out in the midst of your lesson the students are not quite getting it. What do you recommend to teachers?
The key to it is always trying to figure out what gets in, what's blocking them. And so, I've had them, I had them read 3 pages, and I asked a few questions. And like you say, oh my goodness, I thought they were going to make a couple of specific mistakes. They're just lost. They don't get it at all. They don't even seem to know what this is about.
Right.
Um, what am I going to do? That's a worst case scenario. I'm going to take them back and say, let's take this in pieces. We read 3 pages. You really struggled with that. Why don't we try let's just read the first paragraph. I want you to read the first paragraph, and I'm going to ask you some questions. Let's see if we can figure out that first paragraph. And we're literally going to break it down and go through it with the idea that I have to figure out what happened here. And sometimes what you're going to find out, this happened to me not too long ago. I was working with a group of middle school kids, and I've got a whole group of teachers watching my lesson and the principal of the school. And I've got this 2 classes of middle school kids put together. I'm not even sure I like working with 1 class of middle school kids, but 2 is really fun, especially when you're being observed. And I asked the kids to read like 2 pages. And then when they were done, I started asking questions, and they're making up answers. These kids just blew it off. They didn't read it. It
Right.
wasn't even a case that they read it badly. They were just, we're not going to cooperate.
Sure.
And I explained to them that, they had embarrassed themselves and embarrassed me a bit, and I wanted them to go back and read it again. And we're going to give this another try. And it was a whole different game. And boy, at the end of it, the number of teachers who either took me aside right then or later in the day when I was going around the school, oh, I'm so glad you did that. I'm so glad you made them do it again.
Yeah.
And the kids were kind of shocked. Clearly, they played this game with other teachers and it got them out of something, or they did. So there was a case of, we're just going to do it again. I want to see what you can actually do. And,
Mm,
not trying to hurt their feelings or, oh, this will show them. I can't teach you unless you read this, and I need you to read this, and let's not mess around this time. And boy, it was a whole different game.
yeah.
So this notion of their lessons can go bad all kinds of ways. You have to remember your job on this one is to teach kids to make sense of this text. And so always think of, you can cut it down to a piece of text that is small enough that the kids can scale it and that you can see what's going on. And of course,
Sure.
sometimes that is what the problem is. The kids can't, they can read, but they wear out after a page. You
Stamina.
asked them to
Yeah.
read 3 pages, they fell apart after the first page and just gave it up, and now are
Mhm.
giving you nonsense answers. Gee, I'll cut it back to a page, and then next time it'll be a page and another paragraph, and then it might
Sure.
be a page and 2 paragraphs, and then it might be three, 2 pages, and so on. We teach kids those things. We build that kind of stamina. That
Yeah.
isn't just, oh, well, I'll just tell them 4 pages because I want to be done with this. Now you have to build stamina, and that's
You
part of
do.
what we teach. And so break it down and then get kids back into it and then figure out if anything's still going wrong, and if it is, what in the heck is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. So as we close, Tim, if you could just say one thing to empower our teachers and school leaders, what would that one thing be?
I don't know if I can ever say one thing.
You and I have that same problem.
My one thing is the way I'll say it is this. What teachers need to remember, what principals need to remember, is there are only 3 things that people have ever found to raise academic achievement, whether it's reading or anything else. There are 3 things. One, the amount of time that's expended on it. How much time do you put into this? In my schools in Chicago, I mandated 2 to 3 hours a day of reading and writing instruction. It's not a set time, it's 2 to 3 hours because some schools need more than others, but time matters and how we use that time matters. So that's one issue. The second one is you have to teach the right things. In reading, people do a lot of things that they just like the activity, or that somebody told them it was good, and therefore, and some of it makes your job easier. I'm going to
Sure.
let the kids go read on their own for a half an hour because that teaches motivation supposedly. And now I'm going to read a text to them for another 20 minutes. Heck, half my reading period's over already, and I haven't
Yeah.
had to teach anything. The things that make a difference in reading: word knowledge, which includes both the the decoding aspects of that, phonemic awareness and phonics, and those high frequency words and spelling, that kind of stuff. But the other end of it too, the meaning part, vocabulary and morphology. We need time put into that. Text reading fluency. Can kids actually read the words in text and make it sound like English, and put the pauses in the right place and go at a speed that allows them to understand? The third one is comprehension, or learning from text. Fourth
Yeah.
one is writing. Uh, those are the things that if you teach, there's a real payoff in overall literacy achievement. If you teach other things, not so much happens. So time matters, what you teach matters. And the third one is teaching quality. This notion of teaching kids from the right books is really a teaching quality issue.
Mm,
If you have 2 teachers and one is going to teach her fourth graders with third grade books and the other one's going to teach her kids with fourth grade books, and they're both going to teach the same lessons and they're going to spend the same amount of time, my expectation is the kids in the fourth grade class, the kids working with those fourth grade books are going to do better if the teacher's supporting them. And so you've got amount of instruction, teaching those things that are essential, the curriculum, the content, and doing it in the ways that are the most efficient or the most effective, the most powerful. Those are what you have to work with. Those are what we always have to be juggling. It's one thing that you have to juggle those 3 things, but that's what instruction is like. So I always make sure my teachers set aside time for word instruction and fluency instruction and comprehension instruction and writing instruction. The comprehension instruction, a lot of it's going to focus on the kinds of things you've been asking me about.
yeah.
But frankly, the word knowledge work and the fluency work and the writing work can all be connected to that. They could be connected to that central text in the same way. Word knowledge, maybe we're going to do morphology work with some of the words in that text. Maybe we're going to learn some of the vocabulary from that text. The fluency will practice with that text.
Right.
The writing will write about the content in that text. So this doesn't have to be 4 random lessons. It can all be kind of connected. But if teachers have that in their head that time matters, what you teach matters, and how you deliver it matters. And they're always struggling to make sure all of those are at the maximum. We'll have a lot less reading problems than we have now.
Wow, such sage advice from one of my favorite literacy specialists. It's really I believe these are practical things that people can put into practice, Tim. It's been a real joy, like honestly, to just be able to be with you today and to learn from you, as I always do on Saturdays when you send out your blogs.
Thank you so much back at you, Cheryl. I appreciate it. Good
Awesome,
being with you.
awesome.
Thank you.